"You still haven't touched me," said my alien wife as she jumped on me. Marcus Chen had never imagined his career as a xenobiologist would lead him to marriage, especially not to someone whose species considered physical contact a declaration of war. Yet here he was, standing in the observation deck of the ISS Harmony, watching his wife of 3 weeks pace back and forth with increasing agitation. Her crystalline skin shifting through colors he'd learned meant she was upset about something. Zellara was beautiful in the way a living gemstone might be beautiful. Her body was composed of translucent crystalline structures that caught and refracted light, creating rainbow patterns across whatever room she occupied. The Cathari were telepathic, communicating through electromagnetic fields that humans couldn't naturally perceive without translation devices. Their entire civilization had been built on the principle of distance, of respect through separation, of bonds formed through minds rather than bodies. Marcus had been briefed extensively before the wedding. The marriage was political, a symbol of the alliance between Earth and the Cathari collective. He'd been told that Cathari courtship was a slow process, sometimes taking decades before physical contact was deemed appropriate. The female always made the final decision, and until she explicitly stated her readiness, the male must maintain respectful distance. To do otherwise would be seen as aggressive, violent even. So Marcus had been careful, painfully careful. He kept at least 2 feet between them at all times. He never reached out, never made any gesture that might be construed as an attempt at contact. When they had to appear together at diplomatic functions, he made sure their paths never crossed too closely. He thought he was doing everything right, but Zellara's behavior had become increasingly strange over the past 2 weeks. She'd started standing closer to him during their morning briefings, close enough that he could feel the faint electromagnetic hum of her presence. She would find reasons to be in the same room, claiming she needed to review reports or check equipment that just happened to be wherever he was working. During meals in the common area, she would sit directly across from him, her multifaceted eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made the other crew members uncomfortable. The other Cathari diplomats on board had started whispering. Marcus had caught fragments of their telepathic conversations through his translation implant. They called Zellara's behavior unseemly and primitive. One had even suggested she was experiencing some kind of psychological breakdown. The Cathari cultural liaison, an older male named Torven, had pulled Marcus aside yesterday to congratulate him on his admirable restraint in the face of such unusual provocation. He was following the protocols exactly as they'd been explained to him. The human crew members were equally confused, but for different reasons. His friend Sarah, the ship's engineer, had cornered him in the mess hall 3 days ago. "Why won't you just hold her hand?" she'd asked bluntly. "I've seen the way she looks at you. That's not the look of someone who wants space." Marcus had relied on the experts, on the cultural guides, on the detailed briefings about Cathari society. Everything he'd read said the same thing. Wait for explicit permission, maintain distance, let the female guide the pace of intimacy. Now watching Zellara pace in the observation deck, Marcus noticed her skin was flickering between deep purple and soft blue. He'd memorized the color meanings during his preparation. Purple meant frustration or anger. Blue meant longing or sadness. She was cycling between them rapidly, creating a strobe effect that was almost hypnotic. "Zellara," he said carefully, keeping his distance. "Is something wrong? Can I help with anything?" Even without telepathy, he could sense her agitation. The air around her seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy. Her response came through his translation implant, her voice tight with some emotion he couldn't quite identify. "Wrong." "Why would anything be wrong, husband?" "I'm still learning." "You're the perfect, respectful human husband." "I need to check on something in the lab," Marcus said, feeling like he was fleeing but not understanding what he was fleeing from. "Will you be all right here?" Properly distant, appropriately separated. He headed toward the science lab, intending to bury himself in work, but he'd barely made it halfway down the corridor when he heard the distinctive chiming sound of Cathari movement behind him. Zellara was following him. He stopped and turned. "Did you need something?" Close enough that he could see the intricate patterns within her crystalline structure, the way light seemed to flow through her like water. "The lab is this way," Marcus said unnecessarily, then immediately felt foolish for stating the obvious. He continued walking, and she continued following, matching his pace exactly. When he turned into the lab, she followed him there too. "Zelara, what are you doing?" She'd never worked in this lab before. Her actual research space was 2 decks up. Marcus tried to focus on his work, analyzing protein structures from the last planetary survey, but he was intensely aware of her presence beside him. The electromagnetic field she naturally generated made the hair on his arms stand up. He could see her reflection in his monitor screen, could see the way her colors kept shifting, purple to blue to something that looked almost like gold but flickered away too quickly for him to be sure. After 20 minutes of pretending to work while being completely unable to concentrate, Marcus gave up. "I think I need some rest," he said. "It's been a long shift." They shared living space as part of the marriage arrangement, but it was a large suite with separate sleeping areas. Marcus had barely seen the inside of her section. He'd made a point of respecting her privacy, just as he respected her need for distance. They walked back to their quarters in silence, though Marcus was hyper-aware of how close she was walking beside him. Twice, her crystalline arm brushed against his sleeve, and each time he felt a small, static shock. Each time, her colors flashed that brief golden hue he couldn't quite interpret. When they reached their quarters, Marcus headed immediately toward his section, intending to close the door and try to figure out what was happening. But Zelara didn't go to her area. She stood in the common space between their rooms, and when he turned to say goodnight, he found her staring at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Marcus Chen," she said, and her voice through the translator was trembling. "Do you find me repulsive?" "Why would you think that?" "Why won't you?" She cut herself off, her crystalline hands clenching into fists. Marcus felt lost, drowning in a sea of cultural misunderstandings. "I'm trying to respect your customs. I was told that Cathari courtship takes time, that I shouldn't initiate contact, that I need to wait for you to be ready." Through the translator, he heard her take a breath, though he knew Cathari didn't breathe the way humans did. "Marcus," she said slowly, "how long does your species typically wait after marriage before initiating physical bonding?" "Usually not long, sometimes immediately after the ceremony." He felt his face heating up. "But I know that's not how Cathari do things. I know your species needs time. Until then, the male should maintain respectful distance and show no signs of aggression or unwanted advance." It looked almost like the way Sarah paced when she was trying not to laugh or scream. "And has anyone explained to you what the signals look like before a female makes that explicit statement? The behaviors that indicate a female has already made her decision and is waiting for her partner to notice. The standing closer, the finding reasons to be near you, the making excuses to follow you. The colors," she gestured at her own body, which was now glowing bright gold. "Do you know what this color means? I have been broadcasting this for weeks. Every Cathari on this ship knows I have chosen you. They're scandalized because I've been so obvious about it. And you've been treating me like I'm made of explosives, running away every time I come near you. They just said to wait for explicit permission." His reflexes took over and he caught her, his arms wrapping around her crystalline form automatically. The moment their skin made contact, light exploded from Zelara's body. The electromagnetic pulse was so powerful that the lights in their quarters flickered and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the brilliant glow emanating from where they touched. The emergency lighting kicked in just as the door to their quarters burst open. 3 Cathari security officers rushed in, their crystalline forms blazing with combat-ready orange, clearly expecting an attack. Behind them, Marcus could see members of the human security team, weapons drawn but pointed safely downward. "Stand down," the lead Cathari officer commanded, but then stopped mid-sentence when he saw the scene before him. Zelara was wrapped completely around Marcus, her arms around his neck, her legs around his waist, her entire body pressed against his. She was glowing so brightly that looking directly at her was painful, and she was making a sound that the translators couldn't quite interpret, something between humming and singing. "Lady Zelara, are you injured?" the Cathari officer asked cautiously, his combat orange fading to uncertain yellow. "Go away." Zelara's response was broadcast so forcefully that every translator in the room crackled with static. "I am perfectly fine, better than fine." Leave us, which you are currently testing. Leave now. The door sealed behind them, though Marcus suspected they were standing guard right outside, probably arguing about whether to report this to their superiors. Zelera, Marcus said carefully, still holding her because she showed no signs of letting go. Are you okay? Did I hurt you? I was starting to think I'd married the most oblivious human in the entire galaxy. They just said to wait and maintain distance. Cathari males who believe females should be mysterious and indirect. They probably thought they were helping you understand our culture, but they left out all the actually useful information. Where her crystalline fingers touched his skin, he could feel a pleasant, tingling sensation, like gentle electricity. Her glow had dimmed to a soft, golden luminescence that was actually quite beautiful in the emergency lighting. I need to understand something, Marcus said. Is this normal, the light show and the power outage? I think we may have discovered something unexpected about human Cathari physical contact. The voice that came through belonged to Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the ship's xenobiologist and Marcus's colleague. Marcus, I need you both to come to Medical Bay immediately. We're reading some very unusual biological data from both of you. Zelera had refused to let go of Marcus's hand, and he'd stopped trying to convince her otherwise. Several Cathari diplomatic staff had gathered outside the medical bay, their faces pressed against the observation window, colors shifting with obvious curiosity and concern. This is remarkable, Dr. Tanaka said, studying her readouts. Zelera, your crystalline structure is resonating at frequencies we've never recorded before, and Marcus, your bioelectric field has somehow synchronized with hers. It's like your nervous systems are communicating directly. The Cathari evolved on a planet where physical contact between their species causes severe sensory overload. That's why their entire culture developed around avoiding touch. Their crystalline bodies are hypersensitive to the electromagnetic fields other Cathari generate. You're like a gentle wave compared to their lightning storm. When you touch Zelera, her crystalline structure doesn't overload. Instead, it harmonizes with your field. Dr. Tanaka looked at them both with something like wonder. You're not hurting each other. You're completing a circuit that shouldn't be possible. It was more like a pulse of energy, rhythmic and steady. The observation window suddenly darkened as someone activated the privacy screen from outside. A moment later, the door opened and 3 Cathari entered. Marcus recognized them from diplomatic briefings, members of the Cathari High Council, the governing body of their entire species. This was not good. The lead council member, an ancient Cathari whose crystalline form had taken on the cloudy appearance of great age, stepped forward. Her colors were a neutral gray, revealing nothing of her emotions. Lady Zelera, the council member said formally. Your family has contacted us with grave concerns about your behavior. They request that this union be dissolved immediately before you bring further shame to your house. I refuse. This is different. Can't you see that this is different? You are acting like a primitive, like our ancestors before civilization. With respect, council member, may I ask a question about Cathari history? I found references in your oldest texts to something called crystal singers. They were Cathari who could touch each other and create what the texts described as harmony. But these references disappear from your records about 3,000 years ago. What happened to them? The crystal singers were an aberration, the council member finally said. They claimed their touch created beauty, but in reality they were simply less sensitive than normal Cathari. When our civilization advanced, when we developed proper telepathic communication, we realized that physical contact was primitive and unnecessary. Maybe they were experiencing exactly what Zelera and I are experiencing. Maybe they found that Cathari to Cathari touch was overwhelming, but certain pairs could harmonize in ways that others couldn't. You said your species abandoned physical contact because it was overwhelming. But what if it wasn't about the contact itself? What if it was about compatibility? Maybe your civilization gave up on touch too quickly, before understanding that different combinations create different results. Cathari crystalline structures are incredibly sensitive, but that sensitivity could be an advantage rather than a weakness if paired with the right bioelectric field. Humans and Cathari appear to be naturally compatible in ways that Cathari with each other are not. She extended one crystalline hand toward him, hesitant and uncertain. "Would you show me?" she asked quietly. Marcus looked at Zelara, who nodded encouragement. Gently, he reached out with his free hand and took the council member's extended fingers. Her crystalline skin was cooler than Zelara's, and there was a faint tremor in her touch. Light bloomed where their skin connected, softer than the explosion when he'd first touched Zelara, but still clearly visible. The council member's entire body flickered through a rainbow of colors, settling finally on a soft blue that the translator interpreted as wonder. Tears formed in her multifaceted eyes, catching the light and refracting it into tiny rainbows. She made a sound that bypassed the translator entirely, something raw and emotional and deeply personal. "I forgot," she whispered telepathically, broadcasting on a frequency that included everyone in the room. "We all forgot what it was like before we were afraid. Before we decided that distance was safer than connection. The High Council will need to deliberate on this," she said, her voice formal again, but with a warmth that hadn't been there before. "But perhaps Lady Zelara is not bringing shame to her house. Perhaps she is bringing something we lost long ago." Several younger Cathari were watching with obvious interest, their colors shifting between curiosity and something that might have been longing. Over the next few days, the situation developed in ways Marcus never could have predicted. The High Council didn't just approve his marriage to Zelara. They proposed an entire cultural exchange program focused on appropriate physical contact between humans and Cathari. Volunteers from both species began carefully exploring different forms of interaction: handshakes, brief embraces, even something approximating dancing. It was awkward at first. The first time a Cathari engineer tried to shake hands with Sarah, he generated enough static electricity to make her hair stand on end, and they both jumped back in alarm. But they tried again, more carefully, and the second attempt resulted in soft laughter from both parties. Not every interaction created the brilliant light shows that Marcus and Zelara generated. Dr. Tanaka theorized that particularly strong compatibility between specific individuals caused the more dramatic effects. But even simple handshakes seemed to bring Cathari a sense of connection they'd been missing for millennia. Marcus watched one evening as Zelara helped teach a group of young Cathari about human customs of affection. She demonstrated different types of embraces, explaining what each one meant in human culture. The young Cathari practiced carefully with human volunteers, their colors shifting with delight when they discovered that gentle contact didn't hurt, didn't overwhelm, but instead felt warm and safe and right. 6 months after that first chaotic night, Marcus stood beside Zelara at a ceremony honoring the new human Cathari cultural understanding. She wore ceremonial crystalline adornments that caught the light beautifully, and she held his hand throughout the entire proceeding, no longer caring what anyone thought about public displays of affection. When it was her turn to speak, she broadcast her words to both species present, human translators carrying her message to those who couldn't receive telepathy directly. "For 3,000 years, my people perfected the art of distance. We built a civilization on the principle that separation was safety, that space meant respect, that the greatest bonds were those that never required touch. And we were successful. We reached the stars. We built wonders. We created beauty through thought alone. But we also lost something precious. We lost the simple comfort of knowing someone is there, not just in your mind, but in the physical space beside you. We lost the reassurance of a hand to hold when afraid. We lost the joy of an embrace given freely. Humans didn't bring us technology or weapons or strategic advantage. They brought us something far more valuable. They brought us back to ourselves, to the crystal singers we used to be before fear taught us that isolation was wisdom. Touch doesn't have to mean combat. Contact doesn't have to mean pain. Sometimes it just means I'm here, you're here, we're here together, and maybe that's enough." Around the hall, dozens of humans and Cathari stood together, hands clasped, creating a soft glow that filled the space with warmth and light and the promise of connections yet to be discovered. 6 months had passed since the ceremony and the cultural exchange program between. Humans and Cathari had expanded beyond anyone's initial expectations. The ISS Harmony had become something of a pilgrimage site, with Cathari from across the collective requesting temporary assignments aboard the ship just to experience what they were calling the human touch phenomenon. Marcus had gone from being an unknown xenobiologist to accidentally becoming the face of an entire cultural revolution. But success brought its own complications. Marcus sat in the ship's conference room, surrounded by data tablets and half-empty coffee cups, reviewing the latest reports. Zelara was beside him, as she almost always was these days, her crystalline form shifting through contemplative purple as she read through diplomatic communications. The numbers were staggering. Over 15,000 Cathari had formally requested human contact partners. 3 new exchange stations were being constructed. The Cathari High Council had established an entire department dedicated to studying human Cathari interaction protocols. "This is getting out of control," Marcus said, rubbing his tired eyes. "Look at this request. A Cathari noble house wants to hire 50 human touch therapists at enormous salaries. They're treating this like it's a commodity. They think human touch is something that can be purchased or scheduled like a medical treatment. They don't understand that the connection requires genuine care." She dropped a new data pad onto the already cluttered table. "We have another problem. The Zelthani Commerce Guild has filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Council. They care because it's affecting their business. The Cathari were their biggest clients for isolation technology, meditation chambers, telepathic enhancement devices, all designed to help Cathari deal with their natural aversion to physical proximity. That entire market is collapsing because suddenly Cathari don't want isolation anymore. They want connection. That's absurd. They're demanding restrictions on human Cathari contact until a full investigation can be conducted." Dr. Tanaka pulled up a holographic display showing the formal complaint. "And it gets worse. They've found allies. Several species who were uncomfortable with how quickly the Cathari culture is changing have signed onto the complaint." How did it become an interstellar incident? Marcus accepted the call, and the commander's face appeared in miniature above the device. "Chen, we have a situation. A Cathari ship just arrived carrying Lady Zelara's family. They're demanding an immediate audience with both of you. They seem very upset. And they brought what looks like half the Cathari diplomatic corps with them. I'm sending security to escort you to the main docking bay. Try not to start any more cultural revolutions on the way there, okay?" Marcus reached for Zelara's hand and found it trembling. In all the months they'd been together, through all the chaos and controversy, he'd never seen her afraid before. "Whatever happens, we face it together," Marcus said quietly. Zelara's colors slowly shifted from white to gold. "Together, yes, I keep forgetting I'm not alone anymore." Zelara's family stood in a tight cluster near their ship's airlock, 5 Cathari whose crystalline forms marked them as high nobility. Behind them stood at least 20 other Cathari, all wearing the formal wrappings that indicated diplomatic status. Human security personnel lined the walls, trying to look professional while clearly having no idea what was about to happen. Zelara's mother stepped forward. She was taller than Zelara, her crystalline structure more angular and sharp. Her colors were a cold gray that revealed nothing. When she spoke, her telepathic voice was broadcast loud enough for everyone in the bay to hear. "Daughter, you have brought unprecedented shame upon our house. Your actions have destabilized thousands of years of Cathari culture. You have made a spectacle of yourself and our entire species. There is a difference. They're seeking out aliens for physical contact like addicts seeking a drug. The collective's entire social structure is crumbling because you couldn't control yourself around one human male. You taught me, Mother, that the highest nobility comes from serving our people's true needs, not their comfortable habits," Zelara said. "Our people were lonely. They were isolated. They had built walls so high around themselves that they forgot what connection felt like. I didn't destroy our culture. I reminded our people what they'd lost. They call us the house that produced the Cathari who acts like a human. They say our bloodline has been contaminated." Marcus recognized him as Counselor Vexthar, one of the more conservative members of the High Council. His colors were a disapproving purple. "This is precisely why we have come," Vexthar announced. "The High Council has completed its investigation into the human Cathari contact phenomenon. We have determined that while the initial connection between Lady Zelara and Marcus Chen may have been genuine, the rapid spread of this behavior represents a dangerous psychological contagion. Contagion? Dr. Tanaka pushed forward from where she'd been standing with the human observers. That's completely unscientific. What we're seeing is a natural response to discovering a safe form of physical contact. It's not a disease. In 6 months, 15% of the Cathari population has requested human contact partners. Traditional meditation centers are empty. Young Cathari are abandoning their telepathic training because they'd rather hold hands with humans. If this continues, our species will lose the very traits that define us. Or maybe, a new voice said from the entrance to the docking bay, your species will remember the traits that defined you before fear took over. Everyone turned to see the ancient council member who had first touched Marcus's hand months ago. She moved slowly into the bay, her clouded crystalline form catching the light. 2 younger Cathari supported her on either side, but when she reached the center of the room, she gently pushed them away and stood on her own. Counselor Sarthia, Vexthar said with obvious surprise, we were not informed you would be attending this meeting. I have lived for 347 years. I have served on the High Council for 2 centuries. And in all that time, I have watched our people become more isolated, more distant, more afraid of anything that might make them vulnerable. Marcus took one, Zelara took the other, and soft light bloomed from the 3-way connection. I have spent the last 6 months doing something I should have done decades ago, Sarthia continued. I have been researching our oldest archives, the records from before we decided that touch was primitive. Do you know what I found? The characters were in an old dialect that the translators struggled with, but the meaning was clear enough. These are records from the Crystal Singer era over 3,000 years ago. They describe how our people used to live. Cathari would bond with partners, sometimes from their own species but often from others, and these bonds were celebrated as the highest form of connection. Physical touch was seen as sacred, not shameful. Before we evolved proper telepathic communication. When the Great Plague came 3,000 years ago, it spread through physical contact between Cathari. Millions died. Our people were traumatized. So we created an entire culture based on avoiding touch, convincing ourselves it was evolution rather than fear. We told ourselves we were better off, that telepathy was superior to touch. But we were lying to ourselves. We were just afraid. Even if this is true, it doesn't change the fact that our entire society is in chaos because of what my daughter started. She reached out literally across the gulf between species and found connection. And yes, it has created chaos. All real change creates chaos. I am proposing to the High Council that we formally recognize the Crystal Singer tradition again, not as something primitive to be ashamed of, but as an honored part of our heritage that we foolishly abandoned. Lady Zelara and Marcus Chen would be recognized as the first modern Crystal Singers, and their bond would be celebrated rather than condemned. Won't they? Sarthia smiled, an expression that looked strange on her crystalline features. I have been speaking with other council members. Many of them have secretly requested human contact partners themselves. They understand what we've been missing. The vote will be closer than you think, Counselor. I came here to convince you to end this marriage and return home, she said quietly. To save our family's honor, but standing here seeing you with him, I see something I haven't seen in you since you were very young. You look happy, daughter. Truly happy. Show me what my daughter sees in this human touch. Zelara's mother made a sound that the translators couldn't interpret, something raw and vulnerable and real. When she finally pulled her hand away, her colors had shifted to the same gold that Zelara wore when she looked at Marcus. Perhaps, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, perhaps we have been wrong for a very long time. The weeks following Zelara's family's visit brought changes that rippled across the entire galactic sector. The Cathari High Council vote had been closer than anyone expected, but Councillor Sarthia's motion passed by a narrow margin. The Crystal Singer tradition was officially recognized again, and with it came a flood of requests, questions, and complications that nobody had anticipated. Marcus found himself thrust into a role he'd never wanted. He wasn't just a xenobiologist anymore. He was a symbol, a representative, a bridge between two species who were learning to communicate in entirely new ways. And it was exhausting. He sat alone in the observation deck late one night, staring out at the stars and trying to remember what his life had been like before all of this. Simple research, quiet lab work, the comfortable isolation of scientific study. Now every day brought new challenges, new diplomatic meetings, new Cathari who wanted to meet the human who had changed their entire civilization. "You're hiding," Zelara's voice came from behind him, accompanied by the gentle chiming of her crystalline form moving across the deck. "I'm not hiding, I'm thinking." Her colors were a gentle blue, the shade she wore when she was concerned about him. "You've been doing that a lot lately. But I think you do sometimes. I miss doing research that doesn't have political implications. I miss being nobody important. Before it became about councils and protocols and cultural revolutions, when it was just two people trying to understand each other. But maybe we can go forward to something new." He almost ignored it, but the sender was Commander Roberts, and she rarely contacted him directly unless something serious had happened. "Chen here," he answered. "Marcus, we have a situation." A ship just arrived carrying representatives from the Zelthani Commerce Guild, and they're not alone. They've brought witnesses and documentation claiming that the human Cathari contact program is causing measurable harm to Cathari physiology. They're demanding an immediate halt to all physical contact between our species, pending a medical review. What kind of harm are they claiming? It looks official enough that the Galactic Health Council is taking it seriously. You and Zelara need to get to Conference Room 1 immediately. "This is the Zelthani trying to protect their business interests," Zelara said as they hurried toward the conference room. "They're manufacturing a health crisis to shut down the program. What if we've been so focused on the emotional benefits that we missed something physically harmful?" They looked like elongated reptiles, with scales that shifted colors based on their moods, not unlike the Cathari's crystalline changes. 3 of them stood at one end of the table, surrounded by data displays and medical equipment. Commander Roberts was there, along with Dr. Tanaka and several other human medical staff. On the Cathari side, Counselor Sarthia had arrived along with Vexthar and 2 other council members. The room felt tense, divided, like everyone was choosing sides before the battle had even begun. The lead Zelthani representative, whose name translated roughly as Merchant Speaker Zix, activated a holographic display showing medical scans of Cathari crystalline structures. These scans were taken from 17 Cathari who have been participating in regular physical contact with humans over the past 6 months, Zix announced, his voice carrying the artificial smoothness of someone who had practiced this presentation many times. "As you can see, there are microfractures developing in their crystalline matrices. Small now, but potentially catastrophic if allowed to continue. Age, environmental stress, normal wear and tear. You can't prove they're related to human contact. They only appear in Cathari who have been regularly touching humans. The correlation is clear. What if in their excitement about the emotional and cultural benefits, they'd overlooked a real physical danger?" Counselor Vexthar stepped forward, his colors a vindicated orange. "This is exactly what I warned the council about. We rushed into this cultural change without proper long-term studies. We let emotion override caution. We are not saying that human Cathari friendship should end. We are simply recommending that physical contact be suspended until proper medical protocols can be established. It's a reasonable precaution. My people have finally remembered what it's like to feel connected, and you want to take that away based on questionable medical data. Would you risk the physical integrity of your entire species for the sake of emotional comfort?" He could see the doubt spreading, could feel the careful progress they'd made beginning to crumble. "I want to see the Cathari who provided these scans," Dr. Tanaka said suddenly. "If they're claiming harm from human contact, I want to examine them myself." "We anticipated your skepticism." One of them, who identified herself as Zelena, stepped forward to address the group. "I participated in the human contact program for 5 months, she said, her telepathic voice trembling slightly. "At first, it was wonderful. I felt connected in ways I never had before. But then I started noticing pain in my crystalline structure, small fractures that weren't there before. My family physician confirmed them, and when the Zelthani contacted me about their study, I agreed to be examined. After several minutes of examination, she looked up with a frown. "The fractures are real," she admitted. "I can see them clearly in the scans." Around the room, the Cathari Council members were already beginning to discuss emergency measures, talking about suspending the program, establishing quarantine protocols. But something didn't feel right to Marcus. He'd spent months studying Cathari biology, had examined countless scans of their crystalline structures. These fractures looked familiar, but not in the way the Zelthani were suggesting. "Dr. Tanaka," he said quietly, "can you show me scans of Cathari who haven't had human contact? Specifically, young Cathari who practice intensive telepathic meditation." Marcus studied the two sets of scans side by side, and suddenly it clicked into place. "These aren't fractures from human contact," he said, his voice growing stronger with certainty. "These are fractures from telepathic overuse. Look at the pattern. They're concentrated in the cranial matrix, exactly where Cathari generate their telepathic fields. I was training to be a telepathic instructor, 8 to 10 hours daily. The human contact was so fulfilling that I didn't feel the need for intensive meditation anymore. Your body, which had adapted to constant telepathic strain, suddenly wasn't under that same pressure. These microfractures aren't from human contact causing damage. They're from the healing process as your crystalline structure adjusts to a healthier, less stressful state." Her eyes widened as the data confirmed Marcus's theory. "He's right," she said, pulling up new displays. "These aren't pathological fractures, they're remodeling. It's like stress fractures in human bones that develop when someone suddenly stops intensive training. The body is adapting to a new normal. You can't prove that human contact isn't contributing to the structural changes. And the burden of proof should be on those claiming harm, not on those claiming healing. Do you feel harmed by your experience with human contact? I thought the fractures meant something was wrong, but what if they mean something is finally right? We should suspend the program until we can conduct proper long-term studies. Real science, not fear-based policy. We built isolation into our culture because we were afraid of vulnerability. And yes, change is frightening. Yes, we don't know everything about what human contact does to our crystalline structures. But isn't the possibility of connection worth some risk? And I would rather be a crystal singer with fractures than a perfect, isolated statue who never knew what it felt like to be truly seen by another being." Then, slowly, Counselor Sarthia began to glow, her ancient crystalline form lighting up with colors Marcus had never seen before. It spread to other Cathari in the room, a wave of bioluminescence that seemed to carry meaning beyond words. "The council will vote," Sarthia announced. "But I know already how I will cast my decision. We move forward, carefully, scientifically, but forward.